A yardstick, or really any straight stick, is probably the most useful object for improving your posture outside of things like a video camera or mirror which we use for visual feedback. Today we're going to be using a yardstick again. So if you don't have a stick nearby, grab one. And if you don't have a yardstick or similar kind of stick at all, do consider getting one. They typically cost about $1, but their value is enormous. Typically, when we use a yardstick, we want to hold it like a sword. There are times when we'll use different grips, but usually you will hold the stick in your palm as if the stick is a sword. We'll be manipulating the yardstick in space, so it's helpful for us to have names for different parts of the stick. We'll call the end below the pinky side of your grip the hilt. The far end will be called the tip, or the tip of the sword. The portion above the thumb side of your grip will be called the blade. To begin our procedure today, hold the stick in one hand out in front of you as if it's a sword. Give yourself a lot of hilt. The instructions are for you to point the tip of the sword towards your upper sternum and move it so that the tip goes against your upper sternum. You want the stick to be horizontal, so that the hilt of the sword is pointing straight out in front of you. Make sure you don't change your grip as you move the stick. Hold the stick like a sword. This is another procedure where having a webcam or camera set up to record you would be massively informative. A mirror can also work. Give this procedure a try before continuing the video, although even if you have the experiment spoiled for you, you'll still most likely experience the same problems regardless. What you will almost certainly find is that this is a difficult set of movements to orchestrate. For some, it may in fact be painful. Essentially everyone will lift their elbow very high to orchestrate these movements, and if you check your video or look in the mirror, you'll see. And it won't be difficult for you to see. It'll be quite noticeable. We may be capable of using our arms and hands to do intricate things, but this experiment should show you that when you have to make movements that are outside of your habit, you don't have nearly the same control. But you will also see some good in what you've done so far. To get the stick positioned as I've described, you will have moved your arm very far forward, and your elbow will be pointing outwards. What I've requested is pretty much impossible if you don't point your elbow way out. But most people will find they can only extend their arms so much, and while the forward and out movements are there, the downward movement is totally absent. That is where we see the shortening, in the severe raising of the shoulder and elbow. Let's try the experiment again. Direct the tip of your elbow and your upper arm spot forward, out, and down as you lift the stick. Once the tip of the stick is against your upper sternum, keep it there. Take note of where your elbow is in relation to the stick. The goal is to have your elbow well below the stick. Keep the hand at the height of the armpit and move the elbow forward, out, and down to move it below the stick. There is a large focus in the Alexander technique as it's taught today on the idea of contending with your reaction to a stimulus. The goal is to not be automatically reactive, but to instead have conscious control over your reaction to something that stimulates a response in you. This procedure is a perfect example of how we can put such a thing into practice. The stimulus is the orchestrated movement that has been requested of you to point the stick against your upper sternum in a specific way. The habitual reaction we saw is one of shortening, where you had to extend to complete the act you did. You extended your elbow forward and out, but you massively shortened by pulling the shoulder and elbow way up in response to the stimulus. But we can change this response by applying our directions. When you're confronted with the stimulus to bring the tip of the sword to your upper sternum, if you follow your directions, you will have the means whereby to extend your entire arm and shoulder as you respond. If you work with this a bit, I think you will see that you can change your response to a stimulus by applying the appropriate directions to bring about lengthening and widening in your body. You should be able to keep your shoulder down and your elbow below the stick as you bring it from the height of your elbow to your upper sternum. This procedure was rather shocking to me when I first used it. At first, it seemed impossible to not lift my shoulder and elbow, but when I saw that I could move my elbow and shoulder down throughout the act, I realized I had a lot more options than I thought in how I use my arms. My feeling sense said I had to lift my shoulder and elbow. The idea of not lifting the shoulder and elbow would not even have crossed my mind. It was not an option I was aware I had. But after working with this procedure, I knew I could do otherwise, if I followed my directions. So if you want to take control over how you react to stimuli in your day-to-day life, how do you do that? You can pause for a moment before reacting, there's nothing wrong with that, but how are you going to change your reaction? I'd really be curious to know how someone could perform this procedure while keeping their shoulder and elbow down without using verbal directions to change their reaction. I'm not sure someone could. Most of us use our arms a lot, practically all day long, to do all sorts of things. Try to observe yourself and see. How often are you massively raising your elbow and shoulder when you don't have to? Can you pause when confronted with a stimulus and use your directions to change your reaction from a habitual one to a reasoned one? I'll leave you with a fairly easy question today. I've put forward that we would like to have the arms rest vertically straight in front of the plane of the ribs. We've looked at how we can move the arms forward so that they're no longer retracted and flexed, but are instead extended. But what is the other variable that we can manipulate to get the arms forward of the plane of the ribs? Think it over and then join me next episode, and we'll continue our journey.